All right. Well, thank you for taking the time to look at my presentation. This is my older adult oral video presentation, the interview that I undertook with my neighborhood Charlie. But we'll get to that in just a moment. My name is Phil. Here we go. The developmental stage from Erikson's developmental model that I have chosen is generativity versus stagnation. This is the main concern of middle adulthood. Middle adulthood is defined as those years between ages 40 and about 65. Main tasks during this time include child rearing, teaching, mentoring, social responsibility. Most adults, I guess Erikson reasoned that most adults during this time are focused on generative tasks such as raising your kids and such. So that is the one pole of the one pole in that developmental period. Individuals who are not really succeeding in this stage and in accomplishing these tasks can stagnate, so that's why the other pole is stagnation. They can become kind of self-involved, a little bit self-absorbed, and they said the description of stagnation is that I took from the example there is that this is when a person will exhibit a lethargic attitude towards the world, can become very self-involved, and as with every other stage that we have within Erikson's model, such as identity versus identity confusion, or isolation, or intimacy versus isolation, you have the two poles, and they work in a dynamic tension, and a lot of success in these stages is contingent upon striking a balance between the two extremes, and they say that striking this balance at this stage will prevent generative individuals from becoming burnt out. A simple example of that is by introducing a little bit of that stagnation in those, kind of shows you when you can say no to certain people so that you can focus upon the things that you need to focus upon in this stage of life. So, moving along, we can talk about Charlie. Charlie is an Iowan. So he came from the northwest of Iowa, born in a little tiny farming community there. He said that maybe had 1,000 people in it. It was very, very small. It's all pig farms, cattle, corn, soybeans, the like. And he grew up on a farm. His daddy was a farmer. And he went to give you some idea of just how small and tight-knit the community was, he went to a tiny rural school where he had about 8 students in his class up until about grade 10. And then in 10th grade, he moved across to a local high school, and there he was introduced into a class of about 200 kids, probably between 800 and 1,000 kids in that high school. So it was a big adjustment. It was in the next town over. It wasn't in his town. He had quite the idyllic childhood. He tells a story about how when he was a little kid, his parents would put him on a train with a dime to pay for the conductor, and they would send him on the train to the next town on his own, and his grandma would go and pick him up at the train station, and he'd go and spend the weekend over there. Different world. Tiny little community. You would go to church. Things that you would do on the weekend for fun is you would go to town. You would go to the soda jerk, get yourself a soda, and sit on the park bench across the road with a glass in hand in the park and watch the people walk by. And that was weekend entertainment. So an idyllic childhood. He said his main concern up until about the age of 20 was getting himself into a lot of trouble, playing with his friends. When he was a teenager, drinking and driving cars real fast, meeting up all the pretty girls. Just a kind of a fun kid, a fun-loving young guy, and he didn't really have a care in the world. At about the age of 16, 17, he met his wife in high school, and they married young. They married at 18, And at 18, he went and enrolled in college and started working full time. Wasn't really sure what he was doing with his life, but that didn't stop him from pursuing a degree in accounting and business administration, which he did complete while working full time. He got his stuff done, and he started working soon after that. And didn't enjoy it. Didn't enjoy the working world, and so he approached his dad right around his 20th birthday, and he said, "I want you to teach me the family business. I want you to teach me how to be a farmer," which pleased his dad immensely. And so at the age of 20, he started to work on the farm. It was difficult, though. If you see here from the slide, Charlie talks about the fact that at age 40 he had been on the farm but for 20 years. But that in 20 years of farming, they had only broken even 3 times. Only 3 of those 20 years were they able to break even. It was very difficult for him in this developmental stage. I mean, he was his dad being a farmer. There was an expectation in his community. There was an expectation from his family to a degree that he was going to carry on his father's work. And you see that this expectation was sort of tempered a little bit, was mollified a little bit by the fact that his younger brother decided to come in and get into farming along with Charlie. He came to him right around age 40, and he said, "Listen, why don't you teach me how to do this?" And Charlie says, "I'll tell you what, I'll teach you how to do it, and then I'm leaving, because there's got to be a better way to do this." And so that was a difficult moment for his dad, for his mom, but at the same time, the greater concern was that the farm would stay within the family. So, and as you see here in the next point, the expectation had been largely on the side of the community that Charlie had grown up in, and always lived in the same house growing up. When he started farming, his dad had built a house at the end of the road where he lived on, because there's his dad's house, a house that they owned, that they had kept his grandparents when they were old, and then a new house that they had built that they were going to rent, that they didn't rent. Eventually Charlie and his wife just moved in there, and that's where their kids were born and such, and that's where they'd lived for 20 years on that farm. So the expectation had been largely on the side of the family, that on the side of the society, that didn't want to see kids leaving. And he left Iowa after finding a job, and he lived in a variety of different places for a number of years before finally settling in Delaware. And so let's take a look here at some more. Initially, the challenge for Charlie was the whole business of letting his family down during this stage. His brother's desire to get into farming helped this. But he had been on a farm for 20 years, and so he didn't really know how to look for a job. And if you want to think about the developmental stage of identity versus identity diffusion, which is between about the ages of 12 and 18, Charlie had never really taken those years to consider what he wanted to do when he grew up. And then he just sort of into farming, just like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life around 20, and so he gets into farming because he didn't really care for work. So now he's been slapping pigs and milking cows and, doing soybean for 20 years, and now he's got to look for work. So finding a job was challenging, but he was able to find a job with Georgia Pacific's sheetrock division in the next town. And right after they hired him, they moved him off to Wilmington, Delaware, where he was here for 6 months on a managerial track training. Right after this, they moved him to Quanah, Texas, and that's up in the north of Texas, close to the border with Oklahoma. They were there for about 8 months, and then they moved to Fishkill, New York, which is kind of right close to Yonkers. I don't know how many know the city, but it's north of the city, close to Yonkers. His wife hated living in Quanah, just absolutely hated, and she finally put her foot down, and she demanded a move. We'll refer a little bit to how the locals treated them later, but basically Yankees were the very bottom of the social pole, and that's below everybody and everything. So he put in a transfer to move someplace else. They transferred to Fishkill, New York. They were there for about 3 years. His wife didn't really care for living there. And while they were there, she had a friend who suggested she apply for a position that was open within the University of Delaware in an administrative capacity. And she went and interviewed for the job. I mean, New York to Delaware, that's a long drive. Well, she got the position, and Charlie at this point reasoned, you know what? You followed me around everywhere. Now it's my turn. Time to return the favor. So they moved the family. About 1990, I think he said it was. He moved the family down from Fishkill, New York, to Newark, Delaware, and he found a job with Keene, which is a local gas supplier company, and he worked there until retirement. So it kind of worked out for him to move down here to Delaware. We want to take a look at the psychological crisis, and the thing that really just evolved through the conversation, and it was obvious from the moment I was done talking to him. The psychological crisis for me is that Charlie had tried here for 20 years to carry on with his father's work at the farm, and he hadn't succeeded. Hadn't really gotten anywhere. And so he left the family farm to strike off on his own. In leaving the farm to set off on his own, he resolved an issue that was sort of blocking him in his progression as an individual, that was really from the identity versus identity diffusion stage. And that had to do with, where does he really see himself going? What are the sort of things he wants to do? It's a whole lot of fun to drink with your buddies and drive on the straight roads of Iowa at 90 miles an hour, but that's not really going to help you come to the conclusion of what you're going to do with your life. So that was an unfinished task. He didn't really have any inkling at the end of his teens as to where he was going to go with his life. That got more sorted out through this crisis after having spent 20 years on a farm and nothing coming from it. So, Charlie's 20 years on the farm. Let's take a look at some demographic stuff here. Charlie's white, from a small town in northwest Iowa, and he stated that he worked on a farm as he was expected to do by the people of his hometown. Leaving town was frowned upon. His leaving, though, and finding work and being able to care for his family gave him a sense of confidence. And there's this little quote that I've put in here that I love in this marvelous Iowa drawl of his. He says, you do what you're told, and then one day you go off and you do what you believe you need to do, and you find out that the sky isn't going to fall after all. It makes you feel vindicated, which makes me think that this whole move was such a positive thing for him, and it shows to me that Charlie exhibits a healthy generative behavior. Wanting to do what is best for himself, for his wife, which is, outside of himself, so self-transcendence, and for his children, which is the main concern at the generative stage. And then also while striking a balance with this stagnation and not continuing to live under this expectation from his family and from his community. Moving along. The only real time that Charlie experienced prejudice was when he was living in Quanah, Texas with his wife. And here's the quote that I'll put in here. The social order there was that native Texans came first, then the African Americans, and then the sort of second generation naturalized Mexicans, and then the guys who snuck over the border. And at the very bottom of the totem pole are the Yankees, and that's how they treated us. So they were treated as outcasts. He said that being shunned and refused access to the local social order had led to Charlie's wife demanding for a move back to the north. Understandable. And he expresses an empathy with other outcasts from different races and from different ethnic backgrounds, and then it draws from this experience that he had in Quanah. And he said it opened his eyes to the negative effects of prejudice and engendering a lifelong ethic of inclusion within himself and his family. So we're running out of time in this first half here. So let me just go as far as I can until it cuts me off. Some of the pressures, family had expected him to stay on the farm, but that expectation was tied to keeping the farm in the family. Let me just hit pause, and then we will just carry on with the next one. Thanks. Talk to you soon.